Hey there, Danny here. Welcome to my ramblings. Sorry I haven't been on much this week. Wednesday, I had a small car accident. I rear-ended somebody, sprained my finger and my hand. How I did it, I don't remember, but it was sore afterward. It was sore when I was driving around, and I didn't think much of it until my hand started swelling up. Anyways, what I want, I'm gonna be real and raw tonight with you. So I think when you lose a loved one, part of your world has ended. And there are days where you don't know how you're gonna get through. It takes everything out of you just to get up and shower and go do the things you have to do. I know for a while after my mother passed that I was kind of a numb zombie. I just went through the motions. And I've done pretty well with dealing with her, the grieving from the loss of her. But I wanna speak about. I've been watching this show, and it was on Netflix, and it was about her husband, the love of her life. Her husband it dies of cancer, and the anger and everything else that she. I'm gonna try to get through this without crying because I've been crying on and off most of the night. The anger and the rage that she feels being powerless and taking care of somebody who's dying of cancer is it's a different ball game. And I'm gonna tell you that my sister Laura, we don't consider steps in my family. But my dad's married to her mom, so it's my mom too that I call her. I call her mom too. Laura, in December, Christmas morning, in 2019, my sister Laura died from stage 4 breast cancer. Well, that Thanksgiving before she passed, I was visiting, like I always do over Thanksgiving. And I went and sat with Laura for about 4 or 5 hours, and we talked about everything and anything. And I asked her if she was scared and if it was hard. Or was she at peace in accepting it? And she looked at me, and we locked eyes, and I listened wholeheartedly, open-minded, open heart. And she said to me the hardest part was she was the one that was dying, but she had to comfort everybody else that was crying and upset that she was going to die. She said that was the hardest part to deal with. So I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until I closed the front door and left, and I just lost it then at that point. I didn't want her to comfort me. So when my mother got sick and I went to take care of her, I didn't want her to have to take care of me. She was the one dying. And when you watch somebody die of cancer, it's an awful, awful thing. It's horrible. You're watching somebody deteriorate to nothing. So I didn't really cry in front of my mother because I didn't want her to spend the last bit of her life having to comfort me when she needed the comforting more than I did. I did cry with my mom twice. Once when the elders from the church came to anoint her, and we were in a circle around Mom, holding hands and praying, and right after she got anointed, and I couldn't stop the tears. And then one other time when she asked me if I was gonna say goodbye to her, and I told her no. I'm not telling you goodbye. I'm gonna tell you until I see you again. I'm not saying goodbye. Other than that, any of my tears that came, I would go down to my car, have a couple of smokes. My two sons and my friend Jen were really the ones that got those crying calls from me. If I felt like reaching out, there were a lot of times where I just needed to cry. Anyways, watching this show on Netflix, I've dealt with the grieving of my mother. It comes and goes. It's not as bad as it was in the beginning. June 15th, 2023 will be 2 years that my mother has been gone. And watching this show and all of her anger, I don't think I've ever dealt with what I went through when I was caring for my mother. And when you're caring for somebody with cancer, and most people don't tell you the part that I'm about to tell you, and when it first happened, it really rocked my world. I mean, my world was, oh my God, I was in total shock. Not only do you have to watch them deteriorate to nothing, they lose muscle mass, they drop weight quickly, they can't, there comes a point where they can't even sit up on their own. They're just so weak. And she had, her tumor was in her stomach. So they did a bypass before she came home from the hospital so I could take care of her. But that only left her being able to take, 2, 3, 4 bites and maybe a couple of sips here and there. But there came a day, and nobody told me this, and I really think that you need to know this if you have to take care of a loved one with cancer. They get mean. It's not them. You have to take into consideration that they're dying, and they know it. And they are losing their dignity because they can't bathe themselves, they can't wipe themselves, they can't go to the bathroom by themselves, they can't do anything. So I can just imagine how awful that's gotta feel. But my mother got kind of mean. The first time it happened, it shocked me. And I'm talking mean, like viciously, verbally mean. She was mad at me. I don't even remember for what. Let's just say that when she couldn't walk because she didn't have the strength, she was at the end. I think the last 6, and I took care of her for 3.5, 4 months. I think the last 6.5 weeks I didn't work. I was with her all the time unless she went to my Aunt Sharon's for the weekend. And that only lasted for a period of time because then she got really sick and couldn't travel. She couldn't even get down the stairs of her apartment complex. When she first got really nasty and mean with me, it floored me. I didn't know how to respond. And then when they're on hospice, you can call at any time for anything. There's always somebody there that will talk to you. If you need a nurse in the middle of the night, they will have one there as soon as they possibly can. Whatever you need, anybody who works in hospice, in my opinion, are angels that walk amongst us, because I could never do what some of these wonderful people did for my mother and for my family as we were going through all of this. But she would get mean at times. And they don't tell you this. So when I called and talked to the social worker about it, she said that it can get worse. Well, my mother's cancer had spread throughout the body, and they had found some lesions on the brain. That was a hard thing to deal with. But I think that I never fully grieved or dealt with my pain from being a caregiver. I've never done anything like that in my life. I mean, I took care of my sick kids and everything, but they weren't dying. When you have to take care of somebody that you know is dying, and you have to watch them deteriorate to nothing, that is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, was watch her deteriorate to nothing. And there wasn't anything I could do. I could just keep giving her medication to try to make her as comfortable as possible. And that was a huge struggle throughout the whole time. But I don't think I ever dealt with the caregiving part of it until I saw this show. And when I saw her anger and her want to fight, but knowing that the fight wasn't gonna amount to anything because it was still gonna be an ending, I think it hit me. And I've had a few different times recently where I'm just distraught. So if you have to deal with somebody who is dying of cancer and you're taking care of them, you can't take the cruelness that's going to be said to heart. You have to realize that it's not truly your loved one. The cancer's taken over. And as scared as you are, and as lonely as you are watching all of this, I can't even imagine how scared and lonely she had to be. She never talked to me about it. She wouldn't. She did talk to some of her siblings. She talked to about it because they would talk to me about it. She had it in her mind that if she was sick longer than I knew, and she didn't tell me, and she begged certain family members to not tell me that because I would get mad. I don't know why she thought I would get mad, because I wouldn't have gotten mad. I was losing her. I was losing her forever, and I wasn't going to spend that time being mad and angry at her, because this was the only time that we had left. And it got to the point where she would sit up for about 5 minutes. It was all she could do. And towards the end, she couldn't even do that. I'd have to sit and hold her in the seated position, otherwise she'd start to fall over. But she would get mean and angry because she wanted to believe that she could walk. She couldn't. There was no chance that she could walk. And she used to get mad at myself and my Aunt Sharon and yell at us and tell us that we were lying to her and we were drugging her so we could make sure that she couldn't walk. We weren't. It was the way that it was. She couldn't comprehend that. But I don't think I ever dealt with the caregiving part. And when you're a caregiver to somebody who's dying, that's a 24/7 job. This went on for 6.5 weeks that I had to be like full time. She couldn't be left alone. If I had to run to the store, the gas station, or anything else, my Aunt Sharon did come at the last 3 weeks or so. prior to then, if I had to leave to go shopping or whatever else that I needed to do, pick up medications or whatever, I'd have to have one of the neighbors or one of her friends would come over and sit with her, so I could go take care of these things and come back. There was no breaks. There was no... It was a 24/7 job. And I don't think that I ever fully grieved the stress that I sucked down and swallowed it so I could get through taking care of her. And it's hitting me pretty hard lately. So when you lose a loved one, I think that pain is the worst kind of pain that any human could go through. And the reason that I say that is because when you lose a friendship or a relationship or something else, they're still alive. They were only meant to be in your life for a period of time. You can learn to move on from that. When they die, you can't. They're never coming back. You have to hope and pray that you say everything that you need to say before that day comes. And I used to think, years ago, I used to think that if somebody died and you knew they were dying, and you got the chance to spend time with them, I used to think that that would make it easier. I was totally wrong. The shock of losing somebody that you don't know is gonna pass, that's devastating. And I've had relatives and family members and friends and stuff that have passed, and it's been a shock. The hardest part was knowing the inevitable was coming and not knowing when that was. I used to sit for hours and hours. I read several novels that were like that thick during that time. She wanted to have her oldies shows like Hazel and things like that. That channel was on 24/7, and if you shut it off, she would wake up and get mad. So I did a lot of reading, and there would be times where I would find myself sitting there with the book in front of me, but because the chair was right next to her bed, I would look over and I'd stare at her chest and make sure that it was still moving, that she was still breathing. And I would sit there for extended periods of time just looking at her like that and thinking, oh my God, what happens when she does pass? It was planned that she was supposed to pass in her home, the apartment she was in. That didn't end up happening, but I remember being terrified of the day that she stopped breathing, and I was going to be alone there with her. And I didn't know if I'd have the strength to make that call, to have hospice and family come. I didn't know because I had never done that before. But I can tell you that I never dealt with the hurt, the pain, and the fear that I felt taking care of her at the end of her life. And I guess over the past year or so, I've just really thought, okay, well, I didn't need to deal with it. Until I watched the show and I saw that woman's pain, and then it flooded back. It flooded back. It flooded back how torturous it was. to watch a loved one die of cancer and become unable to move, unable to do anything. We could never get her medications right. They would up them, and it'd go good for a little while. It would last every 4 hours or so. She'd have to have her medications, her pain medications, and that wouldn't last. They'd leave that afternoon and have upped her doses for us, and by the time 3-4 in the morning came around, we were back to an hour and a half to 2 hours giving her medication. She would never tell us she was in pain. She would 100% lie and say she wasn't, but you could see it in her face. You could see it when she tried to move. She had a couple of cats. Her one cat, Lucky, kept trying to get up on the bed and be by her, but we couldn't let him up there because he would walk on her stomach and stuff like that, and he didn't know, but he'd cause her pain. She never once said she was in pain. She lied about that the whole time, and I knew she was. But I never dealt with, I never dealt or grieved the pain and the stress of taking care of somebody 24/7 dying of cancer. It's an ugly thing. It's a difficult thing. I knew I was strong enough to get through it. I did. I couldn't have done it without the love of my family and friends, the people that I hadn't talked to in decades came out of the woodwork and were so supportive and so loving and kind, and I desperately needed that at that time, just so I didn't want her to take care of me. She was the one dying. But I never dealt with that pain. I just swallowed it all down. And then when I watched this show, it brought it all back. It brought it all back. It flooded back. And I feel like I'm back at the early grieving stages after she passed, where I'm just kind of going through some of the motions, and I'm just getting up and I'm doing things. And I know, I mean, it's only gonna be here in June 2 years that she's been gone, so it's still raw, it's still new. I don't think I'll ever not grieve. But after she passed, there were a lot of times when I would be out doing delivery and tears would just come. You don't have control over it. You can't stop it either. It just comes. So I'd pause the app and I'd pull over in a parking lot and I'd just let it out and let the tears come as they needed. They were a lot and they were often in the beginning. Well, I'm back to that right now. After going through watching that show and realizing that I never really dealt with the pain and the anger and the frustration and the fear of taking care of her, I'm kind of back at square one, it feels like. And I know that I'll get through this. I'm sharing this with you in hopes that any of you ever have to go through this. And I pray to God that you don't have to. You're not alone. I will be here if you need to talk, if you need someone to lean on. Because the truth is, we know that we're going to bury our parents in our lifetime. We know this. That's going to happen. We know it all of our adult life. We just never think that it's going to come, you know. And as they get older, we know they're getting older. She had a scare back in 2015. She had AFib and had a stroke. And we almost lost her then. And that was a long recovery time, but we got through it. So I really had expected that I would end up losing her to another stroke. Cancer was never a thought in my head. But I will tell you, to take care of somebody and watch them deteriorate, no. That every day could be the last day that you see them alive. That you get to touch them and feel their warm skin and watch their chest and their stomach as they're breathing. You don't know when that last day will come, even though you know that they're dying. You don't know when that last day is going to come. And that's hard. Every day you get up wondering if that's the day. There was parts of me back then that wanted, when that time came that she did stop breathing, there was a part of me that didn't want anybody around. And it was because I didn't know how I would react. And I didn't want somebody there. And then there was another part of me that didn't want to be alone when that moment happened. I was alone with her when that happened. We were in hospice at that point. We couldn't get her medications regulated. And they struggled with it in hospice too. When she went to hospice, it wasn't far from her apartment, so I stayed in her apartment. But every morning I would get up and I would get cleaned up and I would go up to hospice and I would sit with her all day until nighttime, and then I would go home and I would eat something and I would go to bed and I'd do it again. That she went in on a Friday evening, and then that Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday, that Tuesday she passed. I was there. Sorry.